Welcome to Acclime Conversations. We talk to the business people that matter in Vietnam. Today, I'm talking to Thomas Harris, who's the Vice President of Logistics and Fulfillment at Tiki Corporation. Tom, great to have you here.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
I'm going to talk a bit about e-commerce and more importantly, the boxes behind that and how everything comes together in Vietnam. But before I do, Tom, I want to hear a bit about your journey to where you are today and how you got here to the role with Tiki. What's your bit of a background on your story?
It's quite an interesting one, actually. I started off in finance. My father always told me to get in finance because in good times they need accountants and in bad times they need accountants more. So I actually started off in accountancy and finance in internal audit for T&T Express in the Netherlands. I was actually a qualified accountant after a couple of years, held that, and I was in internal audit. I traveled around all the different countries in Europe, annoying senior management, asking them silly questions at about 24, 25 years old. And then I was lucky enough to come over to Asia to run the regional office for Asia Pac, looking after North Asia, Southeast Asia, Australia, running the audit team out of there. I then moved over to China as CFO and looking after mainland Taiwan and Hong Kong. And then lucky enough, about 10 years ago, I was asked to come over to Vietnam as finance director for T&T Express. Did that for a couple of years and then took over as country general manager. Did that for about 1 year. And then I moved over to the Yellow and Reds to DHL, and I started up their e-commerce business. So in 5 months, I went from nothing to a complete domestic network covering the whole of Vietnam. And then lucky enough, about 3 years ago, I was asked to be the VP of Fulfillment, looking after all the warehousing, the pick and pack, and also the return logistics after sales as well.
Fantastic. So there's nothing wrong with finance, by the way.
So I've done finance, I've done general management, I've done operations. During my time in T&T Express, FedEx were taking over, so there was no sales and marketing director, and there was no IT director, and there was no finance director.
That was you.
It was just me. Board meetings were very, very easy. Everyone agreed with me.
So your role at Tiki is about boxes. Now, when people see e-commerce, that's not what they think. It's e-commerce generally comes computer, app, interface, buying, glitzy, shiny. Tell us the truth. What if I'm dealing as an e-commerce customer online, what really happens behind the scenes and why is your role so important in that?
I think the core of any e-commerce is about, firstly, the customer and also, obviously, the product. And what you see when you're dealing with a website is you don't see the customer and the customer doesn't see the product. So what actually happens is everything in the back end. It's so critically important that you keep your promise to the customer. And the only way you do that is through top-notch logistics, how you get the product to the customer when you promise to get it to them. So it's essential from an e-commerce environment that the logistics behind the front end is there to ensure that we actually keep our promise to our customer and get the product to them.
So when I'm putting my order in, I wait, the guy on the motorbike delivers it. With that pack there's information updates along the way and just making sure that happens. What does that involve traditionally? Is it package goes through 2 or 3 different warehouses? Does it go through 5, 10 hands? What does that look like in the back end for a typical scenario? And I know that everyone would be different, but give us a typical sort of an idea of what's happening behind when I place an order.
Yeah, well, years ago it had been many, many touch points, but to minimize the cost and also increase the speed, which is the 2 main elements of e-commerce logistics, or if not any logistics, is about reducing the touch points, reducing the speed and reducing the cost. So essentially nowadays it's about getting the products as close to the consumer as possible. Therefore, you would want to minimize the touch points. And that's why, for example, in e-commerce, you have your warehouses across the country as close to the consumers as possible. And therefore, we can pick, pack, and then deliver it within the shortest period of time.
So from the COVID lockdown, how did that impact and how did you and Tiki deal with that, given that you were having, like everywhere, certain places under restrictions, you couldn't do a lot of things, yet the demand was pent up because people had no choice. Online was the only path. How did you navigate that and what did you do to deal with it?
I think it's mainly about being agile. So, for example, we were lucky enough to have several warehouses in each of the major cities.
Was that a deliberate strategy pre-COVID?
No, actually, it's a deliberate strategy after COVID. Okay. But no one predicted COVID, so it wasn't the case. Therefore, certain companies could deal with it a lot easier than others. But ultimately, with it being such a massive impact, everyone was affected, especially during the very hard close that we had for that month or so. Every single logistics company was impacted, but we managed to recover very, very quickly due to just our systematic approach to dealing with the backlog. However, like I said, we were able to be slightly agile as we had the several warehouses in each one of the cities, and also several depots around the cities as well. Therefore, we could alter our orders to maybe another warehouse if one warehouse was closed down. But in fact, we took very much a proactive approach to ensure that as soon as the government restrictions or the government laws were passed down to us regarding spacing, masks, hand sanitizers, etc., that we really did stick to that as strictly as possible. Temperature controls on every single entry point within our FCs and our warehouses. So we took a very much a hard approach to that. So we were able to very much kind of carry on operations day in, day out, even through these difficult circumstances, by sticking to the rules. And I was very adamant on that. And I used to wake up every single morning, and we work by text message and Telegram and various other text messages every day. And I was strict and updating them every day. You stick to the rules and we'll get through this.
Protect the business, protect it and move ahead.
Yes.
And was the business dramatically different after COVID? Because you would have had lots of procedures and the ability, as you said, to move things around and make those decisions. Did things change after COVID, or was this just accelerating change that was already happening?
I think a lot of people saw the certain restrictions by the authorities on, especially within districts, unless you had an operations within that district, you weren't allowed to serve. Yeah. So a lot of companies then thought, right, if this is going to reoccur, or if there's another strain, for example, we have to then be able to preempt those, maybe that lockdown in the future. So many companies then expanded into every single district. You know, they could easily have a shop front, and we'd call it a depot. They'd call it a depot. But then we would be able in the future to then operate non-stop within the major cities. So yes, after those restrictions and after experience, and touch wood, we're lucky enough that we haven't gone through another strain or another lockdown. But in future, if it does ever happen again, or if another incident like COVID ever happens, we'll be able to react and maintain operations consistently.
And that's pretty consistent across the main operators of doing the same model. So you're now moving hundreds of thousands of packages a day, and that's a considerable number. And obviously over many years that's been growing. What have you done to achieve that? How have you put things in place? Is it just a matter of lots of different locations, like you say, or is there more to it? Is there more sort of the intricacies behind it? Is the people, the processes, space on airplanes? I don't know. What have you had to do to make sure you can handle that volume?
I think with logistics, it's always about people, process, and systems, and it's also about standardization. I can have a dozen warehouses or 100 warehouses or even more. However, what I've instilled into the company is to have a consistent standard approach. So every single process, every single team, every single system performs in the same way. Even down to the little minor details, which I take a lot of pride in. Every single shift starts at exactly the same time in every single FC. Every single shift finishes at the same time. Every single team is set up exactly the same, no matter which warehouse. So it's about the process and making sure standardization. Therefore, everyone knows what needs to be done, and everything is done in the same way. Therefore, it's consistent approach, and then you get the results at the end.
Expansion's a bolt-on.
It's essentially that everyone's working towards the same goal, and therefore you do not get fluctuations in your speed, in your quality, or in your on-time rate. Every single FC is maintaining the best-in-class standard of on-time performance. Every SC is at the top of its accuracy in terms of best-in-class, and it's consistent. So every number in every SC is exactly the same, and that's how I believe you achieve not only a low-cost operations, but a quality operations as well.
Fantastic. So one of the key points that Tiki has pushed is this 2-hour delivery. What stops others doing that? What are the factors that makes that unique and deliverable in a market like Vietnam, which is quite a unique situation from a concentration of people, but also in the main cities versus the spread across the country? What would others need to do a 2-hour the same way that Tiki has?
I think I'll get onto the operations side, but Tiki is very much a tech company. There are much smarter, younger guys in the Tiki office than me, and there's hundreds of them. And their ability to create a system for not only the front end, but for the back end, the WMS, the OMS and TMS. It's some of the best system I've seen in my 20 years of logistics.
It's where the stock is, at what time, and every step of the way.
Exactly. The ability to plan the pick route within the FC, the ability to from forecasting, from the ability to stow in the correct positions, to have zonal picking, for example. Increases the speed and the accuracy of our inventory and our ability to pick and pack, for example. So yeah, it's a tech company, and they're doing wonderful things. I've worked in previous companies where you ask for a tech change and they say, yeah, it'll take maybe 6 to 9 months and it's going to cost you $50,000 on your P&L for your country. You talk to the tech guys here in Tiki and they're like, oh, okay, let me look at my bandwidth, and they'll say, oh, it's going to take a while. It's going to take maybe 1 week or 2 weeks, and they get it done, and they get it done exactly how you want it. The product that they're producing is incredible. And then from an ops side, anyone can do 2-hour, okay, because you can just get one of the point-to-point guys, one of the guys on the street corner to deliver within 2 hours. But to do it 2 hours consistently at a cost structure which actually makes economical sense is extremely difficult. And again, that comes from consistent approach from people, process, and the system, all working together on a standardized way to day in and day out to deliver that 2-hour delivery.
And you're moving into the 1-hour fresh delivery.
Yes.
It's basically the same process, but a more narrow product range. Is that how it works? Well, what about holding the stock? Is it that having a location in every district works, or is it specific new locations required to deal with the fresh and the 1-hour foods?
Yeah, so during COVID, with and even when we were asked by the government to start it up over a weekend, then we saw the uplift in the fresh, and then going forward, we saw that potential growth area within e-commerce, and it's turned out to be the case. And everyone was trying to do it. We already had the system in place. We already had the process in place. Whether you're picking a widget or you're picking a lettuce, it still doesn't make the difference. How you store the lettuce is also a little bit more difficult, but ignore that. But it was essentially, we had everything in place. We had the system, we had the process, and we had the people. So then we just made smaller warehouses out of anything that we could find. I spent a whole month looking at 60 different locations in every single district in Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi, and we managed to start up the 12 mini warehouses across the 3 major cities in 12 weeks. So we managed.
Those 12 are just focused predominantly on this.
Only on the fresh and convenience supermarket groceries. Yes. So we offer fresh, frozen, and maybe in the future even aqua, for example. But then we place those in certain strategic locations in districts to offer 1 hour delivery across the city.
Yeah. So one of the topics you just mentioned before was the third-party delivery. What's the benefit, and if you were starting an e-commerce business now, to what extent would you look at third-party versus in-house logistics, or the balance between? Where's the tipping point? What's the decision making? How do you sort of deal with that decision? Because it's, from an outsider, this idea of outsourcing cost and risk is interesting. How much do I need internal? And that's it's probably proprietary information to the industry. I'd love to hear sort of just an overview of the decision making.
Well, years ago there was no such thing as like a e-commerce 3PL. So they were relying on, prior to the likes of Yao Han Yang or Yao Han Tikin, for example, they were relying on the Vittel or VN Post.
Or the guy in the corner.
Or the guy in the corner, yeah, exactly. And that wasn't sustainable really, and it wasn't offering exactly what the e-commerce market was requesting. So a lot of the major players started up their own in-house out of no choice, basically. So
and just on that, every company used to have a runner. For that purpose, you had a runner, and now that role doesn't exist.
Yeah. So that's the reason that in-house logistics started, and but now with a lot of foreign direct investment, especially from China and the major players coming in, starting up 3PLs, offering very attractive rates and relatively okay service. That you could come in and start and outsource everything, but there's an element of being your own master and controlling your own volume in terms of speed and quality. It's always much better to in-house your own logistics up to a certain level, especially within the major cities. That's where you can really make a lower cost base for yourself. Because ultimately, if you outsource everything, they're going to take a margin on everything that they do. So if you can do it, especially in the high density areas, and offer the delivery within the three major cities and the tier ones, for example, outside of the Hanoi, Da Nang, and Ho Chi Minh, then it makes sense to have your own in-house. You can have the feeder trucks and line haul in between those. You can have your volume directly injected into those areas, and therefore reduce the overall cost base. But then if you want to go to the likes of Haijiang up in the north, or Fukuok, for example, having your own depot there and your own people there for maybe 2 or 3 packages doesn't really make sense. So then you outsource it to the 3PL, and then they would consolidate all their other volumes and then send it there. And then also, in e-commerce we have our year-end peak season. Our 9/9, 10/10, Singles Day, 12/12. Black Friday, it just never ends now. Every double day is a peak day for us.
Today's a double day of recording this.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, it's a peak day.
You're cringing, okay?
So it's kind of like it's good to have a certain proportion outsourced to ensure that you can then use that flex of the volume and give it out towards them to manage those kind of peak days.
So if I was starting a business, there is an argument for in-house, but there's also the argument for the 3PLs, the external providers, and getting that balance. And definitely, you would say that it work. There's elements of both that are necessary to be successful.
Yes, correct.
And part of this sort of growth, looking at where it's going, we see the concepts of green tech and greenification of our workplaces. We're seeing a lot of the sort of technological change, a lot of environmental change. Where is that leading us? Where's the industry going to go? How is it going to cope with this sort of requirement to be efficient, in the environmentally efficient, environmentally appropriate, yet your delivery of a product uses lots of fuel, it's environmentally unfriendly by simply buying a product. Where is that going, and what's the industry doing about it? What do you see as the major trends in Vietnam and globally?
Yeah, well, in Vietnam, we took a stance within Tiki, because we were sending cellophane and bubble wrap and PE wrap across the country. And that's not really environmentally friendly, right? And so we took a stance maybe just over 2 years ago to reduce our overall dependence on plastics. So at the moment, around 80% of our packing is economically friendly. Environmentally friendly. So we will hopefully reduce it completely down to zero. However, until we kind of see the kind of changes in the rest of the world coming into Vietnam, it's going to be extremely difficult. And then, in the future, and what we see in the likes of Germany and Europe is the move to EVs, electric vehicles, and that will come, and it's even coming with the likes of VinFast and their investment in EVs, for example.
So you see that as coming, that sort of thing, not yet, but very soon.
Yep. Yeah. So, and it's already happening in some of a lot of the express companies, for example, they've moved over to the e-bikes. So that's starting now. And then as long as the public then also embrace the batteries that you see across China now, where you can just swap in and swap out. Once that becomes more popular, that will be a huge impact from an environmental basis.
Are you seeing things like rooftop solar in your logistics centres and things like that becoming more sort of necessary, required part of what you're doing? I mean, so in a very broad sense, sort of where, the ecological side of things,
Yeah.
or we're not quite there yet. It's more about just get a building and get a package.
Yeah, well, the landlords like the solar on top of their roofs because they seem to take all the benefit, but don't really pass it down to the likes of us. So we're still paying full rates, but they seem to have a lot of solar on their roof. But yeah, we were in an event last week, and solar was a major talking point, and we'll see huge investments into the likes of that. And then the investment up in the centre of the country into wind farms, we'll only see the benefits of that passing into the networks throughout Vietnam. And Vietnam are really investing heavily into the likes of solar and also into wind farms.
And what then, to sort of move it a little bit, right now, today, what's your biggest challenge when it comes to the fulfillment logistics sides of the business? So let the programmers, let the UI guys, the UX guys do their thing with the platforms and their computer screens and the apps. From a fulfillment logistics, your biggest challenge that you face, or alternatively, you see others facing right now, or maybe both questions?
I think at the moment it's about the limitation of and the lack of really top class warehouse for a relatively cost-effective price.
So warehouse near the people.
Yes. So the warehousing's being forced further and further and further away from the downtown areas, and there is a need for those kind of hub and spoke models of the past, of the more typical logistics, especially for the standard packages that are traveling across the country.
So a big warehouse in an industrial park on the fringe.
Yeah. So that was what I believe is kind of the old school, and there's still a market for that. However, I believe when you want to give these names, like people say like Q-commerce, which is quick commerce, for example, but it's essentially trying to get locations as close to the downtown areas, to the CBDs, or to the people that are living in these big housing estates as well. It's getting these types of places as close to the people, which is becoming more and more difficult. Logistics is being forced out of the center as much as possible, but people want e-commerce as close to them as possible. So it's kind of like a fight against each other at the moment.
And are you having to find alternate spaces that you wouldn't normally have used?
So I was looking at schools, I was looking at factories, I was looking, so we managed to find a warehouse in the D4 port, for example, which was, which wouldn't typically be used as e-commerce or even for logistics. It's a port, so it was being utilized for that. But we came to an agreement to use that. We were looking at old restaurants to try and convert into small mini warehouses for our fresh and frozen delivery.
Interesting. Just near my house where I live, one of the competitors has turned a gym into a distribution centre.
Exactly. So, and like I always say to some of my real estate friends, you give me a shed, I'll be able to make it a warehouse. All I need is 4 walls and a roof. Okay, so
at the right price.
Exactly, but that's the more difficult thing at the moment. So that's one of the difficulties for any e-commerce logistics, is that the cost of logistics at the moment in Vietnam specifically, compared to Southeast Asia, is dramatically higher.
And it's always been higher. It's just that differential is just not coming down.
It's not coming down, and it's just generally because of lack of supply. The demand is there. Everybody wants the best warehouse, or a warehouse, as close to the city centre as possible. So when we were going around trying to find new locations, some of the competitors were, we'd go to see one location and then we go to see another one, and as we're walking out, the competitor would be walking in, and then we go to the next one, and then the other competitor would be. We were just following each other around, and then it was who could make the best relationship with the landlord to try and get that location as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Cold chain you mentioned that's a part of, or at the fresh side, is cold chain really going to push into the standard e-commerce box, the typical boxed buy online? Is cold chain going to become important, and that complicates things, or is that always going to be a fringe, sort of an add-on in the main cities?
No, I don't see it at all. I think especially with the younger generation coming up now in Vietnam, and the more affluent generation coming up, it will just replicate what you see in the likes of China. So overall for e-commerce at the moment, I think we're still not over the 5% mark for total retail within Vietnam, but in China it's around 50%. So everyone says, in 15 years' time we're going to be the same as China. And I don't like comparing to China, but it's not going to take 15 years. It's going to be exponential. It's going to be maybe 5 or max 10. And you have to look at the rest of the world. People are ever more busy. People are generally richer than the year before. They have less time. Everyone doesn't like going to the supermarket with their wife, so why go shopping yourself and waste your Saturday or your Sunday when I can go shop for you and get it delivered to your door within an hour, or delivered to your office within an hour, for example. And also, at the beginning, it's a small market because people don't realize it's there, or they realize they don't need it. Because they've never used it or never thought about it. But once you start doing it, you'll find that people and the uptake will increase and increase and increase, and then the percentage will then spiral out of control because it will just be there where people don't think they need it, but then suddenly people realize that the product is there, that the offering is there, and then they use it once, and then they use it twice, and then they constantly use it because they don't want to do the other option that they did before.
And it's always a percentage of our expenditure is cold product, and there's no reason that can't be online for the reasons you say, so that makes sense. Is that achievable across an entire country like Vietnam, or is it still going to be, in the near future, major centres only? Or do you think that's something that, become countrywide to a greater extent?
In the short term, it won't be. It will never expand that quickly because it's just from a cost base that is just not practical.
And the 3PL providers will never be really doing that.
Not until there's at least a level or economies of scale where they can actually actually serve that kind of volume. But even the likes of where I'm from in the UK. If I wanted something delivered, it's only been in the recent, that my mother, for example, in the recent years has been able to deliver something frozen because they have, ambient, fresh and frozen trucks themselves. It will be in the future. If you ask me now, I'm not sure exactly when it will be. But in the major cities, it's very, very easy. But nationwide, especially with a country with a difficult infrastructure like Vietnam, delivering your frozen meatballs down the road, a few hundred kilometers is going to be extremely difficult in the short term.
So I was just to finish up there. What do you know now that you wished you knew when you first arrived in Vietnam? What are some of the lessons and some of the things that you sort of understand differently and you wish you did know?
Yeah, so for me, it was about building relationships. I never realized that. How much respect, essentially for your elders or for senior members, would go so far. I had some idea because I'd been in Asia a while, but especially with the authorities, we were dealing with the customs clearance when I was with TNT Express. We were dealing with the authorities with DHL and with Tiki, especially with the local authorities during COVID. One thing that I really have put a lot of effort in day in, day out is to build and maintain relationships, even with the guys in the past, which ultimately have no impact on my day-to-day operations now, but I still keep in contact with them, and then with my teams as well.
So you can't just be the accountant to just push through everything as a financial consideration.
Sometimes you can.
But there are people. You've got there's people around.
I was very much a finance guy when I first came in, and then I got much more commercially. I got much more involved in the commercial side of business, and then the people side of business as well. And I built relationships with my teams much quicker at the very beginning than I would have when I first came into Vietnam.
Great lesson. I think that applies to any sector, not just sort of logistics and e-commerce. I think it very much is a broad comment to say about entering Vietnam and how to be successful. So we'll finish up there. Tom, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us today.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Look forward to talking again. And everyone else, I look forward to seeing you on the next edition of Acclime Conversations. Thank you.